This series of recordings provides a summary of the material we cover in the state responsibility lectures. So I'll be going through the introductory concepts, then dealing with the two principal halves of the lectures, acts giving rise to state responsibility and the consequences of state responsibility. So the basic concept we're dealing with in the law of state responsibility is this: every internationally wrongful act of a state entails the international responsibility of that state. So we are dealing with the legal consequences of internationally wrongful acts. So up until now we've studied the rules of international law that tell us what states can and can't do. We're now concerned with the breaches of those rules. And that phrase, every internationally wrongful act of a state entails the international responsibility of that state, is Article 1 of the International Law Commission's Articles on the Responsibility of States for Internationally Wrongful Acts, the ILC articles, or ARSIWA as we'll be referring to them. And this was an effort to codify the existing international law on the consequences of states breaching their international obligations. The point about the articles is they're formulated as secondary rules. This has two consequences. First, it applies generally. So these are rules that apply to all other rules we've studied. But also they're secondary rules in the sense that they may be displaced by more specific rules. These are generally applicable rules, and some fields of law will have their own rules on what happens when an obligation is breached, and you will follow those subject-specific rules rather than these general rules. So the topics we cover in these lectures are conduct, breach, attribution. So that's the basic sequence that gives rise to state responsibility. You have conduct that breaches an international obligation which is attributable to a state. We then go to invocation, who has standing to say, hey, an international obligation has been breached here. Defences, how do states say, no, that isn't a problem, it was done for a legitimate reason. What are the content and consequences of state responsibility? What new legal relationships arise between a state that has done wrong and a state that has been wronged? And countermeasures, how do you go about enforcing state responsibility in a system without centralized enforcement of the law? So in the next of these broadcasts, what we'll be covering are acts giving rise to state responsibility. So we'll be going through that basic sequence of conduct, attribution, and breach, and then we'll consider circumstances precluding wrongfulness. So let's make a start on that now. So state responsibility arises from conduct which can be an act or omission attributable to a state which breaches an international obligation, unless there is a circumstance which prevents that act being considered wrongful, which could be an excuse, a justification, or a defense. Alright, so let's focus on conduct, then attribution, then breach. That's our sequence of topics. So conduct, the important points here are that it may be an act or an omission. Also, the characterization of the act is purely a question of international law. International law tells us whether an act is legal or illegal, and therefore the legal status of an act under national law is simply not relevant. You cannot plead national law as a defense to your international obligations. So that's the basic concept of conduct for our present purposes: act or omission characterized by international law. And we'll pick up on issues of breach and attribution in the next of these recordings.